He almost tripped over the spined tail before he realized it was attached to a living creature. "Careful," Tavian muttered, adjusting his grip on the plasma torch as he leaned back to avoid the sharp, iridescent scales shimmering in the ship's flickering interior lights. He was in the middle of a half-collapsed corridor, wedged between twisted hull plating and the broken alien thruster conduit he'd come to scavenge. He'd expected salvage cables, maybe a few bits of advanced tech. He hadn't expected her. She was kneeling in front of a sparking console, each movement sending a shiver of fluid color along her limbs. A low growl of warning rumbled from her throat as she glanced back at him with luminescent eyes. It was everything Tavian could do not to drop his torch. Her tail slithered across the deck plates and nearly wrapped around his ankle. Whether by accident or design, he couldn't tell. She looked ready to pounce. He ran a hand over the stubble of his chin, stepped carefully on a loose panel, and tried not to make any sudden moves. He coughed and cleared his throat. Didn't realize this wreck was occupied," he said. All he got in response was another hiss, and those glowing eyes narrowed. She was definitely not human. From the tail, she had elongated arms covered in faint scale-like patterns that glowed an entrancing violet at her joints. Her face was humanoid enough, but her nose was small and flat, and ridged crests ran along her temples. She wore tattered garments with strange, symmetrical patterns. Maybe once a sophisticated uniform, and her posture spoke of someone used to commanding more space than this cramped corridor allowed. He shifted his feet, trying not to look as threatened as he felt. One misstep could get him skewered by that lethal-looking tail. She sniffed the air, the luminescence across her scales pulsing once. He felt the press of her gaze roving from his boots to his worn jacket, lingering on the patch that marked him as an independent pilot. She swallowed, then spun around with a lithe twist that made her tail brush across his thigh. "Why have you come?" she demanded in a voice that somehow hovered between husky and raw, her accent thick. "Are you salvage?" She tested the human word, half uncertain, half accusing. "I guess you could say that," Tavian answered, forcing the tension from his voice with an awkward grin. "I'm just looking for parts, fuel cells, some plating. Didn't think I'd bump into a living pilot." The word pilot, she raised a brow ridge and swiveled her tail to coil next to her feet. Tavian braced for another hiss. "If I'd known you were in trouble, maybe I'd have brought supplies." That was a lie, of course. He never stuck around for complications. Life taught him it was safer to remain unattached, focusing on quick deals. But something about the vulnerability in her posture, the subtle tremor in her arms, made him want to linger a moment longer. She let out a slow breath and pressed a palm to a glowing panel. Her fingertips glowed in response, as though she shared some resonance with the battered machinery. Tavian couldn't help but stare. He'd never seen an alien interface like that, like her biology was woven into the technology. She tore her attention from the console to glare at him again. "You fix," she said, though it sounded more like a command than a question. "You fix so I can fly?" Tavian snorted, half in disbelief. "Look, lady, I'm flattered, but that engine out there is beyond shot. Half your thruster coils melted. I saw your hull plating peeled back like tissue paper. You'd need an entire squadron of engineers to fix this wreck." He didn't add that it wouldn't be worth the effort. The hull was compromised. The life support system was sputtering. She had to be living on borrowed time, which was what he should be doing, borrowing as little time from this place as possible before he got out. But the intensity of her gaze locked him in place. "Fix?" she repeated, stepping forward until her chin was almost level with his. She stood a bit taller than he did, and her presence was distracting in a way that made his pulse jump. Her eyes gleamed an otherworldly hue that flared brighter in the faint light. She reached out before he could flinch away, placing her palm against his chest. He felt a subtle electric tingle spark through his ribcage. He shivered in response, heart pounding against her hand. That contact and her quiet desperation shifted the air between them. He swallowed, mind racing. "You want me to fix it? If it's even salvageable, it's going to cost you." He meant credits or resources or something he could use, but the way she tilted her head, the way her face softened with a flicker of relief, suggested she thought he was agreeing to help unconditionally. He let out a resigned sigh. Maybe there was a chance to glean some advanced tech from this, or at least help her get stable so he could walk away. with some new knowledge. Gee, fine, he said grudgingly, but we better figure out what the problem is and how you got stuck here in the first place. She lowered her hand, and the swirling luminescence around her tail softened from violet to a subdued pink. Tavian had no idea if that was a sign of trust or simply energy depletion. I am Saria, she said slowly, each syllable carefully formed. Pilot? No, commander, my ship. Destroyed. Need to reach my people. We are not safe here. There was a hint of fear behind her assertive words, and Tavian recognized the surge of protective wariness in his own chest. He'd seen plenty of dangerous corners of the galaxy and suspected whatever had downed her vessel might still be close by. He glanced around at the flickering lights. Yeah, well, neither of us is safe if that reactor decides to blow. Let's find a stable part of the ship where I can see if there's anything left to fix. He turned, stepping gingerly over a bundle of hanging wires. She moved lithely behind him. Even though it was her ship, she clearly expected him to lead, or maybe she was too drained to argue. The corridor led to a small door, jammed open by a chunk of bent metal. Tavian shouldered his way through, and it groaned under the pressure, before snapping off its hinges, sending dust and sparks swirling. Inside was a small control bay, the lights anemic and flickering. Consoles were smashed, chairs bolted askew, every surface warped by the force of some cataclysmic impact. Saria slumped against a console, panting softly, as if even that short walk had taken more energy than she could spare. Tavian realized she might be badly injured, the subtle trembling in her legs, the tight lines around her lips, signs she was more hurt than she let on. He hesitated. He wasn't a medic, but he could at least check for visible wounds. Are you... he began, reaching out to gently grip her arm. The scales felt warmer than he expected, smooth but firm, and again a faint static sensation danced along his fingertips. She tensed. I can manage, she bit out, though her voice sounded weaker now. She snapped her gaze to him. You, who are you? He shrugged. Name's Tavian. Freelance pilot, though calling me a pilot is a stretch. Mostly I run junk from one station to another. The galaxy's a big place full of leftover war relics, and I pick them over for parts. I was scanning the wreck field for anything valuable when your ship's signature flickered on my scanner. He didn't bother say, Ingmore, the less personal detail the better, especially for a scrounger like him. But she didn't push him, maybe sensing his reluctance. Instead, she pointed toward the largest intact console in the center of the room. Systems there, she said. I can keep it stable if you can link your tools. The warp reactor is in critical condition, but I can't leave it. Need it to power distress signals. My people, they'll come. A moment of vulnerability crossed her face. They must come. Tavian huffed out a breath, unshouldering his battered tool pack. Sure, we'll see what I can do. He dropped to one knee and opened a diagnostic sensor. No immediate reading. He cursed under his breath. The main relays are shot. This is some advanced stuff. I don't even recognize half the wiring protocols here. Maybe I can jury-rig the thruster enough to get us off this chunk of hull. Then, if you have a backup battery for life support, we can buy time for your people to come. She didn't answer at first, just watched him with a fierce, unreadable gaze. He fumbled with the interface, trying to connect a cable from his scanner to the console. Sparks flew. Damn, he grumbled, shaking out his hand. She let out a low, amused sound that might have been laughter. He raised an eyebrow. You find this funny? He said, half irritated. I'm getting fried here. Saraya's tail swept the floor behind him, her eyes focusing on his scanning device. You do not ask how to do, you just do, she said, sounding uncertain if she should scold or commend him. Very human. Yeah, well, it's the best I can do. Don't suppose you have a manual for any of this alien hardware, do you? He shot her a wry look, half expecting a retort. Instead, she tilted her head, meeting his gaze head-on, and a little spark of interest lit the glowing markings on her face. For a moment, they remained in heavy silence, neither quite sure how to proceed. Then an ominous groan from somewhere deep within the ship reminded them both that the place could break apart at any second. She gestured for him to continue, and Tavian returned his attention to the console. He wasn't exactly sure why he was helping her, or why the tension between them felt so charged. Her entire bearing made his pulse quicken, and every time she shifted, the flickers of color on her skin seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. He tried to ignore the way his hands trembled slightly as he spliced wires and tried to coax the battered system back to life. Eventually, after a flurry of curses and a few near shocks, something clicked. The console's lights grew steadier, faint pulses of alien symbols flickering across a dark screen. Saria inhaled sharply, stepping closer to brush her own palm across the panel, infusing it with that subtle glow again. Tavian watched, momentarily entranced by how her body seemed to resonate with the ship. She whispered something in her own language, the syllables liquid, mesmerizing. A moment later, the screen brightened, and they both saw the damage readouts, catastrophic in every category. Tavian cursed. "So, yeah," he said quietly. "We don't have much time. We can try to get minimal thrust out of that half-melted drive coil, but it'll only be enough to limp away, if that." He glanced at her, noticing the tension in her posture, the lines of fear and determination etched across her features. "What exactly are you running from?" She paused, as if reluctant to answer. Then she breathed. "Hunters. They brought us down. We were separated from the rest of my fleet. Now the ship is lost. My crew is gone." The look in her eyes made Tavian's chest tighten. "I cannot be found here. I carry the link to my people. If the hunters catch me, it will be used against my kind." Tavian frowned, searching her face for answers. She looked regal even in this broken environment, her back straight, chin high, luminous skin flickering with emotion. He thought of walking away. He'd done it before, left entire communities to fend for themselves when the job got too big. But this time, with her eyes fixed on his, he couldn't quite muster that old survival instinct to cut and run. He turned back to the console. "All right," he said. "We'll get your system stable, then see if we can slip away before the hunters realize you're still alive." She exhaled, relief evident in the slight droop of her shoulders. In that unguarded moment, Tavian suddenly realized how slender she was, how the relentless shuddering of the broken ship forced her to grip a metal beam for balance. Without thinking, he steadied her with a hand on her arm. Her skin felt feverish, the glow swirling beneath his fingertips. They locked eyes, and he swallowed as the air between them crackled. She blinked, something like curiosity passing across her alien features. Then she gently nudged him aside with her tail, an oddly intimate gesture that made heat rise to his face. He cleared his throat. "Let's get to it," he said softly, forcing himself to focus on the battered systems. He had no idea what kind of chaos he was inviting into his life by helping her, but for once he found himself not backing away from the possibility. Maybe it was her commanding presence or that sense of danger swirling around them both. Or maybe he was just too far gone to pretend he wasn't intrigued by the mesmerizing, sharp-tongued alien woman whose ship he'd stumbled upon. The hull rattled again, a telltale sign that the structural integrity was failing. Tavian inhaled, rummaging through his pack for a set of bridging cables. As he worked, he felt Sariad's gaze lingering on him, like she was studying every angle of his face and every movement of his hands. When he couldn't stand it any longer, he glanced up and caught her eye. She gave the barest quirk of her lips, not quite a smile, but close enough to make his gut twist with an unfamiliar flush. He swallowed, focusing on the task, because if he didn't, he might do something foolish, like lean forward and see what those strange, luminous lips tasted like. Time crawled and blurred. Between frantic attempts to stabilize the power flow and rerouting circuits for life support, Tavian found himself head against her in the cramped space, their shoulders colliding, her hip brushing his. He couldn't decide if it was accidental or purposeful. Every touch sparked a rush of electric tension through him. She smelled faintly of something warm and botanical, a scent that made his head swim. He tried to concentrate on fusing two wires, but her tail coiled around his waist for balance, and he nearly singed his own hand. She let out a low, amused rumble, and he cursed under his breath at the flush threatening to creep up his neck. At last, the console let out a low beep, and Saria inhaled sharply. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Tavian offered her a lopsided grin, pulling his tool away. "We've got partial power, maybe enough to get a thruster going." She straightened, turning to face him fully. Her gaze scanned him from head to toe with an intensity that made him acutely aware of every scuff on his jacket. She moved closer, the violet glow in her eyes shifting to a paler hue. He wondered if that was a sign of gratitude. "Thank you," she said, stumbling over the unfamiliar phrase. Then, after a beat, she leaned in, pressing her forehead gently to his. The motion startled him, and he froze. Her breath ghosted across his lips, and her tail lightly brushed the back of his thigh. Then she pulled away, leaving him slightly off balance. He cleared his throat, cheeks high. You're welcome. Let's not celebrate yet. We have to actually see if this works." He turned away, rummaging for a patch kit to seal off the next corridor, but the ghostly warmth of her proximity lingered on his skin. With one quick glance back, he caught her watching him, that predatory tilt to her eyes. He pretended not to notice the way his heart hammered. A part of him wondered if he'd just signed up for a far more complicated mission than he'd ever intended. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about the payday, he was thinking about her, about how he might keep her safe and maybe figure out just what was happening between them along the way. They trudged through the ship in short bursts, aiming to reach the auxiliary control near the rear thrusters. Every corridor was warped or partially collapsed, forcing them to crawl over twisted metal. Sarie moved better than he expected for someone who'd just survived a crash, though she frequently leaned on him. He tried to ignore the thrill that shot through him every time her body pressed against his. Her tail, strong and flexible, occasionally curled around his leg for balance, which at first startled him. Then, bizarrely, he found himself anticipating the touch, craving the press of her scales against his thigh. In the next corridor, a jagged tear opened to space. He had to slam down his helmet visor to keep from choking on the depressurized air, and she hissed, pressing a palm to the emergency barrier. Miraculously, the barrier flickered on, sealing the breach. It only reinforced how precarious their situation was. If one more chunk of debris tore through the hull, they'd both be sucked into vacuum. "We need to hurry," Tavian said, and Saria nodded, though her eyes flicked warily to the hull overhead. The lights were dimming, another sign the reactor was losing stability. She took the lead this time, beckoning him forward with a curl of her fingers, her tail swishing behind in a mesmerizing pattern. He followed, heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the thinning air supply. They arrived at a sealed door that refused to open. With a grunt, Saria tried to force it, but her strength was ebbing. Tavian stepped forward, placing his hands beside hers. "Together," he suggested, and she flashed him a look, part appreciation, part challenge. He counted quietly, and at 3, they heaved the door aside with a metallic shriek. The corridor beyond was black and thick with acrid smoke. He handed her a small filter from his pack, which she pressed to her face, giving him a nod of thanks. Inside, lumps of broken machinery littered the floor. Red emergency lights blinked overhead. In the center was the remains of the thruster control, half melted. Tavian cursed under his breath. Saria sagged, tail dragging behind her. "This... Can we fix it?" she asked, voice trembling with fatigue. He circled the console, carefully testing the structural stability with his boot. The core was scorched, but maybe some parts deeper in the assembly were salvageable. "Might," he said, "but it won't be pretty, and we'll need some of those cables from the forward section." He paused, glancing at her. She looked about to collapse. "Look, you rest a second. I'll see what I can scrounge." She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to decide against it and sank to the floor, leaning against the console's base. Her eyes fluttered shut, and Tavian felt a pang of unexpected concern. She seemed so strong and imposing, but in this moment she was dangerously worn out. Quietly, he rummaged among the debris. He found a length of cable that looked half-functional, tested it, and set about splicing it to the melted thruster hardware. Sweat dripped down his face despite the chill in the damaged compartment. He worked as fast as he could, each spark of his welder feeling like a second ticking off a countdown to catastrophic reactor failure. At some point, he realized Soraya was watching him. He glanced over his shoulder. Her gaze was soft, though her breathing remained shallow. "You risk a lot," she murmured. Humans do that often? He shrugged, not looking at her. Sometimes, not sure what that says about us, maybe we're just too reckless to know when to stop. He tried to sound flippant, but the truth lay heavy in his chest. Normally, he cut ties the moment things got complicated, yet here he was, risking his neck for someone he'd just met. But she needed him, and he was losing his usual defenses around her. Besides, he added quietly, we're not done yet, so let's hold off on any grand praise. She gave a small hum of acknowledgement. It was enough. He returned to the cables, connecting them to a battered surge regulator. Every so often his boot bumped into her tail, and he tried not to flinch at the intimate brush of scales against his calf. Her presence felt like a live wire next to him, all coiled potential. Even exhausted, she radiated a fierce vitality. After an arduous round of trial and error, he managed to piece together a rudimentary thruster control. All right, he said, voice cracking with strain. This might give us a push off the wreckage. Best case, we can break free of the ship's gravitational lock and drift out. Worst case, we blow ourselves up. But hey, at least it's a faster death than suffocating, right? He shot her a dry grin. She stared at him for a moment, lips twitching as though she was deciding whether to be annoyed or amused. Then she pushed to her feet, swaying slightly. He moved to steady her, his hand settling on her waist. The tension in the air flared again. She placed a hand on his chest, her gaze flicking down at his fingers pressed to her hips, her voice turned quieter. You do not fear me? He swallowed. Should I? A spark of her earlier dominance returned to her expression. She let her fingers trail across his collarbone, making him shiver. I am commander of a powerful fleet. Or was. My kind, we are not gentle with outsiders. But you... Her words trailed off as though she couldn't quite reconcile what she felt. Tavian forced himself to draw back before he lost all sense of caution. Let's get to the control room, he said, forcing a light tone to mask the pounding of his heart. She nodded, and together they made their way to an auxiliary hatch that led to a small lift. The lights inside flickered ominously, and Tavian had to bypass a burned-out circuit panel for it to descend. The ride was tense, the cabin groaning around them. Sariat stood close, her breathing still ragged, her tail occasionally brushing his leg. He tried to keep calm, but the enclosed space magnified every tiny shift of her body. When the lift stuttered to a halt, they stumbled into the control deck, which was also barely functioning. Tavian felt like they'd been crawling through a corpse of a ship, but if the thruster coil was truly functional, maybe they'd get enough propulsion to eject. He hurried to the main console and switched on the emergency thruster sequence. Alarms wailed, red lights danced across the panels. Saria hissed, moving to press her palm on a biometric pad. The thrusters rumbled to life. A vibration shook the entire deck, but the power reading remained. Generously low. Tavian cursed. We're not getting enough feed from the reactor. That meltdown damage must be deeper than I thought. He slammed a fist against the console in frustration. Saria's eyes darted, her luminescence flickering erratically. She whispered a string of alien words, voice trembling with some internal desperation. An idea struck him. Look, can you do that resonance thing with the ship? I saw you light up those panels. Is there a way for you to boost the power? He had no clue how her physiology interfaced with the tech, but it was worth a shot. She stared at him, tension swirling in her expression. Then, with a resolute nod, she stepped closer to the panel, pressing both palms to it. Her glowing markings intensified, pulsing in sync with the flickering console lights. Tavian watched as her breath caught, her eyes fluttering shut. The thrusters roared, the deck rattled, and a surge of power lit up the readouts. Tavian jumped into the pilot's chair, what was left of it, and tried to stabilize their angle. The battered hull groaned under the strain, but with a gut-wrenching lurch, the ship began to move. We're clear of the wreck field, he shouted, adjusting the controls. But we've got a big tear in the sea. Yeah, we won't hold pressure for long. Zarya's face tightened. If we can just get far enough from the gravitational pull, we can call for my people. She pressed harder against the console, her body trembling with exertion. The lights around them flickered dangerously. Tavian gritted his teeth, guiding the ship through the swirling debris. Each piece of scrap battered the hull. The ad hoc thruster coughed and threatened to fail. Finally, they cleared the worst of the debris field. Tavian exhaled, feeling a momentary rush of relief. Then, a high-pitched alert sounded on the console. Incoming sensors, possibly a scanning wave, possibly the hunters. He tensed, scanning the readout. Saria jerked back from the console, swaying as though dizzy. Tavian leapt up to steady her. Her luminous markings were dimmer now, and she panted heavily. "We have to hide," she gasped. "They will find us. I must not be captured." Tavian's mind spun. "Let's get to my ship. I parked it nearby. If I can get us out of range, we can figure out how to signal your fleet without them zeroing in on your location." She barely seemed to register his words, too drained to argue. He hoisted her arm over his shoulder, ignoring the jolt of awareness that shot through him at her closeness. The battered remains of her craft were only seconds from total failure. They had to move, now. They retraced their steps through the corridors, stumbling and half running. At one point, a section of ceiling collapsed, forcing them to duck under twisted metal. The decks shuddered violently, the lights flickering to near darkness. Tavian's heart thudded in his ears. If the meltdown hit now, it'd tear them to pieces. He gritted his teeth, half carrying Saria through the final door. The vacuum of space yawned on the other side, but his small salvage ship was clamped onto the hull, an airlock tunnel bridging the gap. They squeezed through, sealing the hatch behind them just as the corridor behind them imploded. Soraya slumped against the wall, tail limp, eyes half-lidded, her lips parted, breath rattling. For a terrifying moment, Tavian wondered if she was about to slip into unconsciousness, or worse. Then her gaze fixed on him, her eyes flashing defiance. "I am not so weak," she said softly, but he could hear the exhaustion beneath her bravado. "Sure," he said with a forced grin. "Just try not to pass out until I get you strapped in. My ship's not exactly built for comfort." He led her into his cramped cockpit, hardly big enough for one pilot, let alone an injured alien commander with a tail. She sank into the co-pilot seat, really just a second crash chair. He strapped her in gently, aware of how her eyes flickered over his every move. He powered up the small craft, disengaged the clamps, and eased away from the remains of her destroyed vessel. A moment later, a blinding flash lit the viewport as her reactor finally went critical. Shockwaves buffeted them, but Tavian managed to hold course, cursing softly at the strain on his engines. When it was over, only debris remained. Saria stared at it, jaw tight, tail coiled around her leg. Tavian sensed the heartbreak she tried to hide. He laid a hand lightly on her shoulder. She didn't shake him off. Together they watched the swirl of twisted metal drifting away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She didn't respond, just closed her eyes. The weariness on her face spoke of loss, betrayal, and the crushing weight of responsibility. As the tension ebbed, Tavian realized how close he was standing, and how the curve of her jaw and the subtle shimmer of her skin in the cockpit light tugged at something deep in him. He forced himself to pull away, focusing on the ship's sensors. Sure enough, the scanning wave he'd noticed earlier was intensifying. Something was out there, searching. Tavian set coordinates to slip behind a nearby asteroid cluster, hoping to hide from prying eyes. He turned to Saria. "We're not out of the woods yet. I'm picking up an unknown vessel in the area. Could be those hunters you mentioned." Her eyes snapped open, a flicker of fear quickly replaced by steely resolve. "They can't see me. If they do, they'll know I carry the link." "The link to what?" Tavian asked, though he suspected it was some vital piece of her species' technology. She pressed her lips together, tail flicking restlessly. "A neural key. It syncs with our entire fleet's command matrix. If they take me, they can track my fleet or use me as a hostage to break them." She spat the words like they tasted bitter. Tavian felt a surge of protectiveness, a strange sensation for someone who usually avoided attachments. He nodded. "We'll lay low. There's a scavenger outpost not too far, though it's not exactly a friendly spot. But we might get lost in the crowds, maybe snag a cloaking rig or scramble your signal." He paused, glancing at her. "If that's okay with you, Commander." He tried to sound casual, but something about the title made her eyes soften. "I trust you," she said, and the simple statement made his stomach flip. He doubted she truly trusted him yet, but maybe she had no other choice. Still, hearing those words from her lips, layered with the raw vulnerability of her situation, did something to him that he couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was the hint of promise that they'd see each other as more than reluctant allies. He refused to name it. He engaged the engines, pushing them toward the outpost at sublight speed. The cockpit fell quiet except for the hum of machinery. Saria closed her eyes again, her tail slack around her legs. Tavian remembered the small med kit he kept under his seat. Carefully, he lifted it out and rummaged for anything that might help her recover. She glanced at him when he pressed a small analgesic patch to her arm. "It's a mild stimulant painkiller," he explained. "Should at least keep you on your feet." She nodded in gratitude, letting the device adhere to her scaled skin. Then, with an unexpected motion, she reached for his wrist, brushing her fingertips over his pulse. He sucked in a breath. She tilted her head, studying him with those luminescent eyes. "Your heart. It moves so quickly. Human." "Hearts are lively," she almost smiled. He swallowed, his voice tight. "Yeah, well, that's a compliment, I guess. Means I'm still alive." Her curiosity about his biology was disconcertingly intimate. She maintained the contact for a moment longer than necessary, then released him. Silence hung between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. He forced his attention to the console, checking star charts and scanning frequencies. The outpost was a few hours away at their current speed, long enough for them to either come to terms with this partnership or drive each other insane with tension. A beep signaled an incoming ping from an unknown vessel. Tavian quickly jammed the signal. Saria's gaze turned sharp. "They're searching," she said, voice tight. He nodded, heart hammering. The game of cat and mouse had begun. The next few hours would be critical. If they found a way to slip the hunters, they might get the chance to plan their next move. If not, well... Tavian cast a glance at Saria, taking in the determined set of her jaw. The risk was worth it. He tried to focus on charting a course, but every so often, his mind drifted to the slender, powerful alien woman beside him. He wondered if he'd truly understood what was happening. See that beneath the flurry of danger and necessity, something else was forming, something that neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge. He pushed the thought away, deciding he'd deal with it later, if they survived. For now, it was enough that she was sitting there, tail curled under her seat, eyes drifting closed as she tried to rest. He'd keep watch, keep her safe, and maybe figure out the rest as they went along. When they finally touched down at the scrap metal outpost, Tavian's tension spiked. The place was a cramped station built into the hollowed interior of an asteroid, with docking bays designed to accommodate everything from small freighters to repurposed pirate barges. The halls reeked of stale air and the lighting flickered with a half-sickly green hue. Tavian led Saria through the narrow corridors, trying not to look like he was supporting her weight too much lest they draw attention. She moved with effort, but her gaze was fixed forward, her posture stiff with that regal bearing. She caught the eyes of a few curious onlookers who quickly decided not to tangle with her. They reached a small compartment that served as a no-questions-asked lodging space. He paid in hard credits, brushing off the desk clerk's suspicious glare. The door slid open to reveal a single cramped room. The floor was scuffed and the bed looked like it had seen better days, but it was private. He locked the door behind them. The hum of station ventilation droned overhead. Saria staggered to the bed, dropping onto it with a wince. Tavian set his bag aside and knelt by her. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. He couldn't help the genuine concern in his voice. She looked at him, the glow of her eyes dim in the poor lighting. "I'll survive," she murmured. "I have endured worse." But her voice was ragged, and Tavian saw the slightest tremor in her hands. "I need time. My body will heal if I can rest. Maybe find a source of energy to feed the link." She trailed off, uncertain. He nodded, wanting to help but unsure how. "Let me see your injuries." She arched a brow ridge at him and he sighed. "Just let me see if you're bleeding anywhere, or if there's a wound that needs patching. I'm not a doctor, but I can manage basic field treatments." Her tail flicked with what he interpreted as annoyance or hesitation. Then, with a low exhale, she shrugged off the torn remains of her upper uniform, revealing a lithe torso covered in a pattern of faint scales that glowed softly at the edges. Tavian swallowed hard, trying to focus on the task rather than the mesmerizing sight. He ran a small scanner over her side, watching readouts flicker on the device's screen. A few cracked ribs, bruising, a minor tear in one of her interior membranes. Nothing that wouldn't heal given proper rest, but serious enough that she was in constant pain. He placed another med patch near her rib cage, carefully pressing the adhesive to her shimmering skin. She hissed softly, not from anger, but from the sting of contact. "You're lucky," he said, voice low. "This could have been a lot worse." She stared at him, her eyes half-lidded, face centimeters from his. She was close enough that he could see the faint lines of color swirling in her pupils like molten amethyst. For a moment, neither of them moved. He felt her breath on his cheek, warm and slightly ragged. There was a magnetism in the air, a pull that made him lean closer without thinking. Her tail slid around his waist, not tightly, but enough to anchor him in place. He shivered at the pressure of those smooth scales. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Instead, she closed her eyes, and a quiet sound escaped her, part exhaustion, part relief, and, maybe, something else. Tervayan's heart thumped like it was trying to break free of his chest. He pressed his palm gently over the patch to smooth it, inadvertently letting his fingers graze her side. She trembled. "Your hands," she whispered, voice husky, "they're so warm." He let out a shaky exhale. She was an alien, a complete unknown, but in that moment, the gap between them felt negligible. Her tail tightened slightly, and he found himself leaning in, drawn by a surge of empathy, attraction, and curiosity. If she wanted him to back off, she could have easily shoved him away with that prehensile limb, but she didn't. Instead, she curled it more firmly, pulling him closer. He let his forehead rest against hers for a heartbeat, remembering how she'd done the same before. Her skin carried a faint electric current that made his nerves hum. She inhaled sharply, eyes fluttering open to meet his. The tension between them was thick, a quiet storm of unspoken desire. He wasn't sure who moved first, but the next thing he knew, his lips brushed hers, tentative and unsure. She made a soft sound, and her hands slid up to grip his collar, pulling him deeper. The taste of her was like some exotic spice, her lips warm and pliant, a hint of sharp teeth grazing his lower lip. A rush of sensation flooded him, and he groaned softly, pressing closer. Her tail coiled around him, locking him to her, while her free hand gripped his shoulder. He felt the flicker of her glowing scales against his arms, every shift of color matching her rising heart rate. The kiss turned hungry for a moment, each of them testing the other's boundaries. Tavian's mind spun. He'd never kissed someone so alien, so fiercely sensual. He wasn't prepared for how mesmerizing she felt. She broke away with a gasp, eyes wide as if startled by her own daring. For a moment, they just stared at each other, breathing heavily. The weight of the moment pressed in. Tavian swallowed, forcing a grin. "That was not exactly standard first aid," he joked, voice coming out more breathless than he intended. Soraya let out a low, rumbling laugh that vibrated through him. "Your healing methods are unusual," she teased softly, though her cheeks, if they could be called that, were tinted with a deeper hue. Slowly she loosened her tail from his waist, but she didn't push him away entirely. Instead, she let her fingers linger on his neck. "Tavian," she said, testing his name with a delicate accent. "You have saved me, twice." He shook his head. "I'm just trying to keep both of us alive. There's a difference." But the way she looked at him sent a wave of warmth flooding his chest. He realized he was dangerously close to crossing lines he hadn't even known existed. He didn't do closeness, certainly not with an alien commander who had an entire mysterious life, yet here he was, heart thundering, wanting more. She exhaled, leaning back against the thin pillow with a wince. The pain in her ribs was evidently catching up with her. Tavian gently shifted so she could lie more comfortably. "I'll let you rest," he said, voice thick with lingering desire. "We still have to figure out how to handle those hunters, but it can wait until you're stronger." She nodded, eyes drifting closed, the faint glow of her scales dimming with fatigue. Yet before sleep claimed her, she reached out, brushing her fingertips across his cheek in a gesture so gentle it made his throat tighten. He caught her hand, squeezed it briefly, then eased away. He spent the next hour pacing the cramped room, half wondering what exactly was happening to him. Every so often he glanced at Saria, who seemed to slip into a deeper sleep, her breathing evening out. He told himself this was just a business arrangement. She needed a pilot and he needed, well, he wasn't entirely sure, credits maybe? But the memory of her lips on his and the feel of her tail coiled around his body made a mockery of that logic. He was in too deep already, compelled by a force he couldn't name. He decided to distract himself by checking the outpost's local rumor channels on his handheld device. If the hunters were here, someone might have spilled the beans about suspicious visitors. He scanned through message boards and overheard comm chatter. There were whispers of a group paying good money for information on a special cargo or a lost alien artifact. Tavien's gut churned. That was definitely related to Saria. She'd said they were after the link. He started formulating a plan, maybe find a back channel to contact her fleet without alerting the hunters. If it existed, it'd be here somewhere. The outpost was full of unscrupulous traders who specialized in covert deals. Of course, that meant trusting shady operators. But they might be their only shot. He glanced at her again, noticing how her scales flickered faintly in time with her breathing. She looked peaceful for once, her fierce expression smoothed away. He allowed himself a smile, maybe she was safe for the moment. When she finally stirred, hours later, Tavien was kneeling beside the bed, a small ration pack and water container in hand. She blinked, her luminous eyes open, tension returning to her features, until she seemed to recall where she was. Then she sat up, wincing. "My body. Not used to this environment," she muttered, though her voice was stronger. Tavien offered her the water. "Drink and eat if you can stomach it." She eyed the ration bar skeptically, sniffed it, then took a cautious bite. Her nose wrinkled and she coughed. "Sorry," he said. "Human rations aren't exactly gourmet, but it'll help restore some energy." She managed a few more bites, though her expression suggested it tasted terrible. After she finished, she took a deep breath, focusing on him. "Where are we?" "Backwater outpost," he replied. "Nobody cares who you are as long as you pay. But the hunters might have eyes here, so we can't get complacent." He explained his plan to quietly track down a black market communications rig that could beam a coded message to her fleet. She nodded slowly, considering the risks. "There's a code phrase I can send," she said. "It's known only to my command staff. If my fleet receives it, they'll know I'm still alive. They'll know to come quietly, in stealth." Her tail flexed behind her, rattling lightly against the bed frame. "Then that's what we'll do," Tavien said, grabbing his jacket. "You should stay here and rest while I make inquiries. Less chance we'll be spotted." She narrowed her eyes, bristling. "You think I hide while you face the danger alone?" He shrugged. "You're hurt, and I'm just making contact. If something goes wrong, I can slip away easier by myself. You, on the other hand, stand out." He didn't add that part of him just wanted to protect her, keep her from further harm. He wasn't sure how she'd react to that. She flexed her fingers as if testing her strength. Then she let out a resigned sigh. "Very well, but be careful. The hunters, they have many informants, and they will pay richly to find me." Tavia nodded, trying to ignore the tight feeling in his chest at the thought of leaving her alone. But it was their best shot. He promised to return as soon as he had a lead. Before he slipped out, he paused, turning back. She was watching him with an expression that made his heart twist. Vulnerable yet fierce. He felt an odd compulsion to go back and kiss her again, to reassure her, but he settled for a small grin. "Lock this behind me," he said, nodding at the door. "I'll knock twice, then once, then 3 times when I return so you know it's me." She inclined her head in understanding. "Come back safely," she said, and he thought he detected genuine concern in her tone. It only reaffirmed the unsteady swirl of emotion that had lodged in his gut. He swallowed, nodded, and stepped out into the station corridor. As Tavien wandered the cramped walkways, he kept his posture relaxed, projecting the air of a nobody scavenger. He chatted with a few contacts, got pointed to a place called the Rusted Nova, a bar at the far end of the station rumored to handle under-the-radar comm requests. His instincts pricked. This place reeked of double crosses and hidden agendas. Perfect. He made his way through the swirling haze of neon lights, ignoring the catcalls from a group of rowdy mercenaries. The rusted Nova turned out to be a seedy dive carved into the rock, the music loud and the patrons louder. He slid onto a stool at the bar, scanning the room. A short, wiry alien with a bright orange crest was cleaning glasses. Tavian leaned in and muttered, "I'm looking for a quiet line." He slipped a couple of credit keys he assumed across the bar. The alien looked him up and down, then nodded toward a door in the back. Tavian picked up his drink, some foul-smelling brew, and sauntered toward the door as if he belonged. Inside, a haze of stale smoke filled a cramped room with a single console. Another occupant, a cyborg with metal plating along half his face, hovered near the console, eyeing Tavian suspiciously. Tavian forced a grin, setting more credits on a small table. "Need a discrete signal bounce," he said. "One-time code, non-traceable." The cyborg stared at the credits, then at Tavian. "Line's not cheap," he rasped. Tavian pushed a few more chips forward. The cyborg grunted, sweeping them into a pocket. "All right, you've got 5 minutes. Then I erase everything. No refunds if you get caught." "Deal," Tavian said, stepping to the console. He typed in a rough approximation of the code phrase Saya had given him, encoding it with the frequency range she suggested. The terminal beeped in protest. Clearly it wasn't standard text, and he had to manually override some filters. A few tense minutes later, he managed to send the message on a rotating scramble that should be difficult to intercept. He ended with an approximate coordinate for the outpost. Minus crucial details. Saria's fleet should know she was alive and near these coordinates, but not pinned down precisely. If they responded, hopefully it would come through the same channel. He finished, stepping back with a sigh of relief. The cyborg nodded, flicking a switch to cut the feed. Tavian waited, half expecting an immediate ping or some trap, but nothing came. No immediate hail of blaster fire or infiltration. He allowed himself to breathe. "Done," he said, turning to leave. "Pleasure doing business." The cyborg didn't respond, merely resumed tinkering with the console. Tavian slipped back into the bar, intending to head straight out, but froze when he saw a group of imposing figures near the entrance. They wore dark armor with sinister insignias, and one of them brandished a small handheld scanner. Tavian's pulse kicked up. Hunters? He ducked his head, turning away so they wouldn't get a good look at his face. Then he eased toward a side corridor, mind racing. If these were the hunters, they might already be searching. Did they know he'd just sent the signal? "Hey, you!" a sharp voice rang out. Tavian stiffened, glancing over his shoulder. The armored figures had stepped closer, looking right at him. "You from the salvage ship that came in a few hours ago?" He forced a casual tone, shifting his weight onto one hip. "Maybe." "Who's asking?" The man sneered. "We're looking for something that might have come on board with you. Something valuable. You see any unusual passengers lately?" Tavian's heart hammered. He gave a bored shrug. "Only unusual thing is the station's choice of music. But if you want my salvage, you'll have to pay." He tried to move away, but the man stepped in front of him, a gloved hand resting ominously on a holstered sidearm. "Don't get smart, human. We've got reason to believe a certain artifact is here. If you're lying, it won't go well for you." Tavian set his jaw, adrenaline surging. He forced a crooked grin. "Buddy, if I had an artifact worth any real money, I wouldn't be standing in this dump. Let me buy." He made a show of pushing past, hoping to play the brash scavenger. The man let him pass, but spat at his boots. Tavian felt their eyes on his back as he slipped into the corridor. He had to assume they'd keep looking, pressing the local population for info. His gut twisted. He needed to get back to Saharaya, fast. Weaving through the labyrinthine halls, he cursed under his breath. If the hunters were this close, time was running short. He mentally planned how to break Saraya out if they got cornered. He reached their room, gave the agreed knock, 2, 1, 3. After a tense pause, the door slid open and he slipped in. Saraya stood there, tail coiled defensively, eyes sharp. She relaxed a fraction upon seeing him. "How did it go?" she asked, noticing the worry etched on his face. "I sent your message." No immediate response, but the hunters are here. A group of them anyway. They're scanning the station, looking for you. He locked the door behind him, turning to face her. She looked steadier, though pain lingered in her posture. "Then we must leave," she said plainly. "I won't let them corner me like prey." Tavia nodded. "Agreed, but we need to wait for a response from your fleet. If they come, we can coordinate a rendezvous. Otherwise, we'll be flying blind." He let out a frustrated sigh. "We can't just wander the galaxy aimlessly." Saria's gaze swept the room as though searching for an alternative. Then her eyes settled on Tavian. "We hide, then. Maybe we can find a less obvious place to wait." He rubbed the back of his neck, mind rate. Through the outpost layout. "We could try the cargo warrens. Lots of crates and containers. But it'll be cramped, and if they track us, we'll be cornered easily. Or we could attempt to bribe a smuggler for passage on a ship leaving the station. But that might mean leaving the rendezvous coordinates behind." Her tail lashed, betraying her agitation. "Is there no place safer?" He blew out a breath. "Safe is relative out here. But maybe there's an abandoned docking tube on the station's far side, old part of the structure. Might not show up on standard scans if we keep a low profile. It's risky, but everything's risky at this point." She considered, then nodded. "Let's do it." She shouldered her bag, wincing slightly but standing firm. Tavian stepped close, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Sure you're up for moving? Because once we're out in the open, I don't want to slow down." "I'm fine," she said curtly, though her expression softened when he didn't back away. Without warning, she lifted a hand to his cheek, a fleeting touch that sent a thrum of recognition through him. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of gratitude, longing, and tension. He caught her wrist gently, turning his face to press a quick, impulsive kiss to her palm. She exhaled, blinking, then pulled away. "We go now," she whispered. They stepped out, scanning the corridor, no sign of immediate pursuit. Tavian led, keeping one hand near his sidearm. The station thrummed with the chaotic energy of commerce and corruption, but beneath the hustle he could sense watchful eyes. They skirted around open corridors, ducking through maintenance passages. Saria moved with surprising stealth despite her injuries, tail held tight against her body. At one point they heard muffled shouting from around a corner. Hunters pressing a group of scruffy dock workers for information. Tavian held Saria back, pressing them against the metal wall. He felt her tense body practically vibrating with the urge to fight or flee. He placed a steadying hand on her wrist, signaling to wait. The hunters eventually moved on, leaving the dock workers cursing in their wake. Breathing a silent sigh of relief, Tavian gestured for them to continue. They slipped past a flickering sign that read Docking L16. Beyond it, the lighting grew dimmer, wires dangled from the ceiling, and the stale air tasted of rust. "This is the old sector," Tavian murmured. "Nobody's used these docks for years unless they're storing contraband or running from the law. Perfect for us, I guess." They found a half-sealed hatch leading to a dark corridor. Tavian pried it open with a grunt. The corridor beyond smelled of damp metal and old coolant. Saria wrinkled her nose. "We'll hole up here?" "Yeah," he said, "at least until we figure out our next step. Should be a few side chambers for storage." Sure enough, they located a small closet-like room with half-broken crates. Tavian shoved the crates aside, making a crude space for them. Then, using a portable sensor from his pack, he scanned the area for any surveillance. The reading came back mostly clean, though he couldn't guarantee the station's older systems wouldn't cause interference. Saria sank onto one of the crates, eyes closed. Her breathing was still uneven, pain clearly nagging at her ribs. Tavian knelt in front of her, lowering his voice. "We'll wait here. If your people got the message, they might respond soon. I'll keep checking the portable comm every hour or so." She opened her eyes, nodding. Silence stretched between them in the dim closeness of the makeshift hideout. The tension from the chase was still high, and Tavian felt adrenaline coursing through his veins. When Saria shifted, her tail accidentally grazed his knee, sending a jolt of awareness through him. He exhaled slowly. She looked up at him, her luminous eyes searching his face. In the faint light, he could see the subtle swirl of colors on her cheeks, the parted shape of her lips. His pulse kicked up again. They were pressed together by circumstance, and it struck him how quickly the dynamic between them had shifted. Hours ago, she was half dead on a crashed ship. Now they were co-conspirators, allies, maybe something more. He reached for her hand, tracing the pattern of scales on her knuckles. She let him, her gaze never leaving his. The air felt charged, thick. He wasn't sure if it was wise to act on the tension building between them, but every cell in his body urged him closer. Her tail curled around his calf again, a tentative tug. He swallowed. "You all right?" he asked softly, though the question meant so much more. She nodded, then leaned in, brushing her mouth to his in a tentative, questioning kiss. He didn't hesitate this time. He returned it, hands finding her waist. She let out a quiet sound, leaning into him. There was desperation in her kiss, a deep hunger that felt like a rush of hot blood through his veins. He kissed back with equal fervor, losing himself in the swirl of sensations. Her taste, her heat, the slight rasp of her scales against his arms. They clung to each other in the darkness, seeking solace and some promise of relief from the danger. His fingers slid up the back of her neck, tangling in the faint ridges of her hair-like crests. She shivered at the touch, pressing closer until he felt the curve of her body molded to his chest. The moment felt both intimate and urgent, like they were stealing seconds from an imminent threat. Her hands moved to his jacket, pushing it aside, and then to the seam of his shirt. He groaned softly, letting her explore. The adrenaline from their escape churned with raw desire, making every touch feel amplified. He was aware that this was probably reckless. If the hunters found them now, they'd be cornered with their guard down. But the need to connect, to feel alive in a place of such danger, overshadowed caution. His own hands slid along her sides, mindful of her injuries. She inhaled sharply when his thumb grazed a bruise, and he instantly pulled back. "Sorry," he murmured against her lips. She shook her head. "It's fine," she whispered. "Just slower." A quiet note of vulnerability crept into her voice, and he nodded, easing his touch. They kissed again, this time a gentler pace, exploring the warmth of each other's mouths. Her fingers teased the back of his neck, playing with the short hairs there. He felt her tail trace a line along his spine through his shirt, a peculiar sensation that made him gasp softly. She smiled against his lips, a small, triumphant sound rumbling in her throat. Desire coiled low in his belly, but he fought to keep from overwhelming her. She was still hurt, exhausted, and they were in a precarious hideout, but with each passing second, the tension built, a thick wave of need that neither of them seemed able to resist. Her breath hitched when he trailed soft kisses along her jaw, down the side of her throat where her scales gave way to smoother skin. The glow intensified under his lips, a pulsing violet. "Your glow?" he murmured, fascinated. She let out a shaky laugh. "It reacts to my emotions." "Then you must be feeling something big," he teased, earning a playful nip of her teeth at his ear. He hissed in surprise, heart hammering faster. She parted from him slightly, searching his eyes in the gloom. "I shouldn't let myself get attached," she confessed quietly. You're not part of my kind, and I still must lead my people. My life is complicated." Her voice wavered, uncertain. He ran a hand through her hair like crests, brushing a thumb over the curve of her cheek. "I know," he said softly. "I'm not exactly good at attachments either." He swallowed, thinking of how many times he'd run from even the shadow of commitment. "We don't have to define anything right now, but I want to help you, and I want to be here with you." It was the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in a long time. She inhaled, eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. Then gently she guided his lips back to hers, wordlessly answering. For a while they forgot the danger, losing themselves in tender exploration. Clothes rustled as they pressed closer, each small sound magnified in the silent corridor. The emotion behind their kisses felt deeper than mere lust, though lust was certainly part of it. There was a sense of comfort and relief, like they'd found a harbor in the storm, if only for a moment. Tavian's pulse thundered as her hands traced the muscles of his back. He cradled her ribs carefully, mindful of the bruise, but she arched into his touch with a soft moan that ignited a more urgent desire. Their breaths mingled, He's pounding in tandem, he trailed kisses down her neck, tasting the salt of her skin, the faint electric hum of her scales. She gasped, nails digging into his shoulders. Just when their touches grew dangerously close to a point of no return, a faint beep from Tavian's handheld comm cut through the haze. He froze, cursing under his breath. Saria stiffened, tail coiling in alarm. Their eyes met in the dimness, both still flushed, breathing hard, but now alert to potential threats. He reached for the device, heart still racing. The beep indicated an incoming signal on the scrambled frequency. They're responding, he breathed, quickly tapping to decode it. Saria steadied herself, arms trembling slightly. Then a faint voice crackled through, speaking her language. Saria's lips parted in a soft cry of relief as she listened. Tavian only understood a few words, but he caught commander, location, and incoming. When the transmission ended, she pressed a palm to her chest, blinking rapidly. They got it, she murmured, turning to Tavian with a rare, luminous smile. My fleet, or a portion of it, is en route. They're coming to retrieve me. They said to hold tight for a short time, and they'll slip into the system unnoticed. Tavian allowed a grin. That's good news, really good news. But beneath the relief, a pang of something else stirred inside him. What happened after she rejoined her fleet? Would she vanish from his life as quickly as she'd crashed into it? The thought twisted his gut more than he cared to admit. Saria caught his expression and studied him. She reached out, brushing a hand over his cheek. I told them of your help, she said quietly. They will honor it. There was something unspoken in her voice, as though she were telling him she didn't intend to discard him. He forced a wry smile. Guess that means I won't have to run for my life from an alien armada. She chuckled softly, then winced at the pain in her ribs. No, you'll be a guest. If you choose. A beat passed, heavy with possibilities. Before they could delve deeper, the corridor lights flickered and distant shouts echoed. Tavian tensed, motioning for Saria to be silent. They heard the telltale clank of boots on metal walkways. The hunters were sweeping the area, scanning for life signs. Saria's eyes widened. Tavian cursed under his breath, quickly powering down the portable comm. They extinguished any light sources, pressing themselves against the wall. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by muffled orders. They could only hope the hunters wouldn't think to check the old docking tubes. A scraping noise made Tavian's pulse spike. The door at the far end of the corridor groaned as someone tried to force it open. He shot Saria a tense look. If they were discovered, a fight was inevitable. He unholstered his sidearm, setting it to stun. She gathered her strength, tail coiled, ready to lash out. They waited, breath catching in their throats. The door rattled, then jammed, and a muffled curse echoed through the metal. After a moment, the footsteps receded, fading back the way they'd come. Tavian exhaled, adrenaline crashing through him in waves. Saria slumped slightly, pressing a hand to her side. That was close, he murmured, sliding his gun back. She nodded, eyes shining with lingering fear. He moved to kneel beside her, pressing a reassuring hand to her shoulder. She leaned into him, shoulders trembling. We won't have to hide much longer, he said softly. Once your people arrive, we'll slip out and meet them somewhere safer. She nodded, gathering her composure. Then she swallowed and locked eyes with him. If we survive this, She hesitated, searching for the words. I want to show you my world, she finally said, voice trembling with raw emotion. You saved me. You fixed my ship. You risked your life. I would have died if not for you. My people, we do not forget such bonds. He felt his chest tighten, a small hopeful flicker ignited inside him. I'd like that, he said quietly, sincerity coating every syllable. She offered him a faint smile, the tension easing from her posture. They settled in the darkness to wait, hearts still pounding but laced with the fragile warmth of the moment they'd just shared. Time crawled, marked only by the occasional beep of the comm unit. Tavian and Saria took turns dozing, though neither dared to fully sleep. Every creak of the station's aging metal made them tense. The hunters still lingered somewhere, presumably combing the outpost for clues. Tavian found himself leaning against a cold wall, Saria half resting against his chest, her tail curled around his leg in a protective, unconscious gesture. Despite the danger, a part of him felt an unexpected peace in this closeness. Eventually, the comm beeped with a coded message. Saria jerked awake and Tavian quickly listened. The voice on the line said something in her language, and she responded with subdued excitement. He caught a few words like hangar and stealth. When she finished, she turned to him, eyes bright. They've arrived. A small stealth frigate is hidden near the station's dark side. They can extract us if we can get to the outer pylon airlock. Outer pylon, that's a good distance, Tavian said, mentally mapping the station. We'll have to cross half the outposts. The hunters might be patrolling, but if we move carefully, we might avoid them. Saria rose to her feet, stifling a groan at the ache in her body. Let's go, she said resolutely. Tavian nodded. He gathered his gear, making sure his sidearm was loaded and ready. Then they slipped into the corridor. They navigated the winding passages, sticking to maintenance tunnels when possible. At one point, they had to pass a security checkpoint. Tavian paid a bribe to the bored guard who barely glanced at Sariu's alien features. The man seemed content to accept the credits and wave them on. Still, it was nerve-wracking, and every step felt like a roll of the dice. At last, they reached the outer pylon, a stretch of corridor that jutted away from the main station, leading to a ring of external airlocks. A single overhead light flickered, casting long shadows. Tavian guided Saria to the correct hatch. She keyed in the code her people had given her, and with a soft hiss, the doors slid open, revealing a small, pressurized chamber. On the other side, the observation window showed the curve of space and the dim outline of a sleek alien craft latched onto the station's exterior. Saria exhaled in relief, stepping into the chamber. Tavian followed, securing the door. They donned thin oxygen masks for the final crossover. One last barrier remained, the small sealed airlock connecting the pylon to the outside. If the hunters discovered them now, they'd be cornered. Tavian's nerves were frayed. He checked the corridor behind them while Saria cycled the system. So far, no sign of pursuit. A green light blinked, indicating the outer hatch was locked to the frigate's coupling. Saria opened it, revealing a short passageway lined with shimmering alien metal. They slipped inside, sealing the hatch. Instantly, Tavian felt a shift in atmospheric pressure as the frigate's system took over. The corridor glowed with soft, bioluminescent lights reminiscent of Sahiri's scales. A pair of armed aliens waited, weapons raised, her people, presumably. They wore sleek uniforms double with the same crest design Saria had on her tattered outfit. Upon seeing Saria, they bowed their heads, then rushed forward to help. She tensed for a moment, then allowed them to steady her. Their expressions a mix of relief and concern. Tavian hovered in the background, unsure of his reception. One of the guards eyed him suspiciously. "Commander, who is this?" the guard asked in a language that Saria responded to with a rapid series of clicks and syllables. She placed a hand on Tavian's arm, guiding him forward. Her voice was firm, and though he didn't understand every word, he caught a few references to Ally and rescued. The guard's suspicious look softened slightly, and he nodded. Saria turned to Tavian, a faint smile on her lips. "They accept you. They will not harm you." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Another guard stepped aside, allowing them deeper into the frigate's interior. The corridors were smooth and organic-looking, with lines of glowing filaments embedded in the walls. Tavian felt an odd sense of disorientation. This was advanced tech, far beyond the patchwork ships he was used to. Saria walked slowly, leaning on Tavian, despite the help of her own people, insisting on staying. Close to him, a handful of the alien crew watched them pass with curious gazes, likely noticing the way she hovered protectively at his side. They reached a larger chamber that appeared to be a makeshift command center. A tall figure with similar markings to Saria stepped forward, eyes gleaming. They spoke quickly in the same tongue, exchanging information. Saria's posture stiffened when the figure mentioned something about the rest of the fleet, and Tavian sensed that not all was well. Possibly these were just a splinter group, or the main fleet was still scattered. He gleaned from their rapid-fire words that they'd lost contact with multiple ships, presumably because of the hunters. Finally, Saria turned to Tavian, gesturing for him to follow her. She led him through a side passage into a smaller, quieter compartment, a private cabin of sorts, though still starkly furnished. She sank onto a softly glowing seat that seemed to mold to her body. Tavian hovered uncertainly near the wall. She pressed her hand to a panel, and the door slid shut with a whisper. "I needed privacy," she explained, voice still carrying an edge of exhaustion. "There are many decisions to make, but first, I want to thank you properly." He shifted, feeling a flutter of nerves. "I just did what I had to," he said. She shook her head. "You saved my life. Repeatedly, you protected the link, something precious to my people. I owe you a debt," she inhaled, eyes wandering over his face. "But it's more than that. I feel connected to you." Her cheeks glimmered faintly, the violet color deepening. Tavian's heart rate spiked. Well, I feel it too." He knelt beside her seat, wanting to be on her level. The ambient glow highlighted the elegant lines of her face. Despite the bruises and exhaustion, she looked regal, and an overwhelming tenderness filled him. "If you need me, I'm here." She swallowed, then reached for his hand. "My people will want me to return to the fleet's heart, to command. We are in crisis. The hunters threaten us. We've lost many, but I cannot face them without acknowledging what we shared." She paused, searching for the right words. "That bond we formed, it is not something I can ignore. We form life bonds through shared resonance, trust, and physical connection. I don't know if you can feel it the way I do, but you've awakened something in me." Tavian's throat went dry. He hadn't realized the depth of significance their intimacy might carry for her species. I don't know if I can feel it exactly, but I know I can't just walk away and pretend none of this happened." She exhaled softly, relieved by his admission. "In that case, stay with me, at least for now. My crew might question it, but if I present you as a trusted ally, one who deserves a place by my side, they will accept you." A swirl of conflicting emotions spun inside Tavian. He'd spent years drifting from one salvage job to another, never letting anyone get too close. Now, a part of him ached to follow her, to see her world, be part of something bigger than himself. Yet he also feared losing his freedom, being tied to a grand conflict not his own. He studied her eyes, luminescent with a quiet plea. "All right," he said at last, voice thick. "I'll stay. I'll follow you, Sariel. We'll figure out the rest as we go." She closed her eyes in relief, leaning forward to rest her forehead against his. The gesture reminded him of their first moment on her ruined ship. "Thank you," she whispered. Her tail slid around his waist, anchoring them together. He felt the gentle charge of her scales. The moment was tender, overshadowed by the looming uncertainties of the future, but neither of them withdrew. A soft chime at the door broke the intimacy. Saria stiffened, calling out in her language. The door slid open, revealing one of her officers, a young alien with anxious eyes. He spoke quickly, and Saria nodded, turning to Tavian. "We must move. The ship is ready to depart, but the hunters may have detected our presence. We're going to rendezvous with another group of my fleet and try to slip away before they lock down this sector." Tavian stood, nodding. "I'm with you." She rose as well, wincing at the pain in her ribs, but her resolve remained fierce. Taking the lead, she stepped into the corridor with Tavian at her side. The officer bowed and hustled ahead, presumably to pilot them out of the station's range. Crew members parted to let their commander pass, though more than one glanced curiously at the human at her flank. Tavian tried to project confidence, even as adrenaline churned in his stomach. This was her world, her people. He was just a scavenger pilot who'd stumbled into something monumental. In the frigate's small command center, the lead pilot manipulated controls on a console that lit up with swirling alien script. Tavian hovered near the back, letting Saria handle instructions. The ship's engines hummed, a vibration through the deck plating. A moment later, the overhead display showed them peeling away from the outpost, the asteroid receding behind them. Tavian exhaled, thinking of how close they'd come to a deadly confrontation. Then a sharp alarm blared, and the pilot barked something urgent. Saria cursed, glancing at Tavian. "They've spotted us. One of the hunter's vessels is locking weapons." Tavian's gut clenched. "Can we jump to faster than light?" "Not with the stealth engaged. We need a safe distance before we spool the drive." She barked an order, and the pilot fired thrusters. The frigate lurched, weaving through space to avoid the station's weapon range. The overhead display flashed as a laser beam grazed them, rocking the ship. Tavian stumbled, grabbing a handhold. Saria glared at the readouts, furious. "They're faster than we expected. If they get a tractor lock on us, it's over." He grit his teeth, scanning the readouts. The hunter's vessel was larger, heavily armed. They were outgunned. "What's your plan?" he asked. She tapped a sequence on the console, spitting out quick commands to her pilot. "Divert power to engines, minimal shields, we outrun them." The pilot nodded, and the hum beneath their feet intensified. The frigate surged forward, trying to slip past the enemy's targeting arcs. Another volley of beams streaked by, one slamming into the frigate's aft quarter, shaking them violently. Warnings blared, crew members scrambled, Saria's chest heaved as she steadied herself. Tavian stepped to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. She glanced at him, and for a split second he saw the fear in her eyes. She was risking everything, her entire command, for a chance at freedom from these relentless hunters. "We'll make it," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if it was to reassure her or himself. Slowly, the frigate began to pull away from the station's gravity well, inching closer to the boundary where they could engage the faster-than-light drive. The hunters gave chase, closing in. Tavian's heart thundered. "They're going to get a shot," he warned. The overhead display blinked red as the enemy locked onto them. But Saria's pilot let out a triumphant cry as the coordinates for jump space lit up. "Do it," Saria ordered. The pilot slammed a control, and the ship lurched forward in a disorienting wave of blurred starlight. Tavian's stomach dropped as they entered the slipstream, leaving the outpost and the hunters beat behind. Relief crashed into him. They'd escaped, at least for now. The jump was short, depositing them in a remote sector of empty space. Another vessel waited for them, larger, with the same sleek design. Tavian recognized it as Saria's main command ship. She inhaled sharply, eyes shining. Her people had truly come for her. The frigate docked smoothly in a massive bay. Once inside, a flurry of medics and officers rushed forward, greeting Saria with respect and concern. Tavian stood awkwardly at her side, trying to stay out of the way, but she wouldn't let him fade into the background. She placed a hand on his arm, pulling him forward, as her second-in-command, a stern-faced alien with shimmering gold scales, demanded a status report. Saria explained rapidly in her language. Tavian caught fragments referencing the crash, the meltdown, Tavian's role in her rescue. A few glances shot his way, some skeptical, some intrigued. The second-in-command bowed, acknowledging him with a curt nod. It was a grudging acceptance at best, but it was something. Thro was ushered to a med bay, Tavian following close behind. The ship's interior was grander than the frigate's, arched corridors, luminous panels, and an air of disciplined calm. In the med bay, a pair of alien doctors scanned her injuries. Tavian lingered near the entrance, feeling out of place, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. She caught his eye from the examination table, raising a reassuring hand. Time passed in a whirl of tests and treatments. They had advanced healing methods, including some kind of cellular regenerator that sped the mending of her ribs. Tavian watched in awe as the bruises already seemed to fade. Saria, relieved of pain, gained back some of her commanding presence. When she was declared stable, she rose gracefully from the table, thanking her medics. Then she gestured for Tavian to approach. He did so, hesitantly, aware of the many eyes on them. "Come," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "There is much to do." She led him through corridors to what appeared to be a strategic command chamber. Large displays showed star charts, fleet formations, and readouts about the hunters' movements. Officers snapped to attention as Saria entered. Tavian found himself the subject of more curious stares. She ignored it, taking her place at the head of the room, tail swishing with restored energy. Then she convened a meeting. He stood quietly off to the side as her officer. S reported. They'd lost several ships in the last ambush. Many of their people were missing or scattered. The hunters had grown bolder, pushing them into hiding. Saria's expression hardened. She delivered orders with a clear, unwavering authority. It was obvious she was deeply respected, though some of the crew seemed uneasy about the new human presence. Eventually, she ended the briefing, and the officers dispersed, leaving just her and Tavian in the chamber. She turned to him, eyes reflecting the swirling lights of the displays. "This is my life, Tavian. A life of war, responsibility, and burdens. I don't wish to tie you to it if you'd rather go." He studied her face, the vulnerability flickering beneath her controlled exterior. "I'm already tied to it, aren't I?" he said gently. "I don't know how to be part of a fleet, but I know I want to stand by you if you'll have me." He swallowed, heart pounding as he admitted it. He was making a choice that would change everything. No more drifting. She stepped closer, placing a hand over his chest, right where his heart raced. "I'll have you," she whispered. "We can figure out the rest. Together." Her tail slid around his ankle in a light, teasing caress, and he felt a wave of what? Arm flood him. A discreet cough made them both turn. Her second in command stood at the door, face carefully neutral. Saria withdrew slightly, clearing her throat. "What is it?" "We have intel on the hunter's next move," he said, stepping forward to present a holographic display. Tavian hovered near Saria, eyes scanning the readout. The hunters had a blockade forming near a star system that apparently was crucial to her people's supply lines. She muttered a curse, tail twitching in agitation. "We can't let them strangle our route," she said. The second-in-command nodded. "We'll need to coordinate a strike or a diversion. We're short on ships, but perhaps with clever tactics we can slip past them." Saria paced, deep in thought. Tavian watched her, lips pressed together. He might not be a brilliant strategist, but he knew a thing or two about infiltration from his scavenger days. "What if you use a decoy?" he offered tentatively, stepping closer to the holo display. "Send a smaller group to lure the hunters away from the route, while the main fleet slips in behind them. You'd need someone with a ship that looks like prime bait, but can outrun them when needed." Saria studied him, surprise and a hint of admiration in her eyes. "We might have an older frigate that can be fitted with special thrusters," she mused. "It would be dangerous, but if it worked, we'd bypass the blockade." The second-in-command nodded slowly, exchanging a thoughtful glance with Saria. "We will refine the plan, Commander. The final decision is yours." Saria inhaled. "Do it," she decided. "Begin preparations. We move soon." The officer bowed and left, leaving them alone again. Saria turned to Tavian, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You're already helping shape fleet tactics. I see you have a cunning mind for misdirection." Tavian rubbed the back of his neck. "I spent a lot of years avoiding pirates, corporate enforcers, you name it. You pick up a few tricks." He looked around the chamber, feeling both out of place and strangely welcomed. "I hope it helps." She moved closer, resting a hand on his arm. "It does, more than you know." Her voice was soft, laced with gratitude. Then a quiet hush enveloped them. He caught a glimpse of the same longing in her eyes that he felt in his own chest. With a hesitant smile, she said, "Let's find some rest. We'll have to leave soon, but there might be time for a moment of calm before the storm." He nodded. "Lead tea." "Way, Commander." They slipped out of the command chamber, heading down the corridor to her private quarters. As the door slid shut behind them, Tavian felt a tight coil of anticipation. The space was more elaborate than the frigate's cramped cabin. A gently curved room with an organic-shaped bed that seemed to grow out of the floor, the walls lined with subtle lines of glowing patterns. Saria exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing as she stepped inside. He set his gear aside, watching her carefully. She turned to him, tail swishing across the smooth floor. "Come," she said, voice low, eyes reflecting the soft lights. "This might be our last quiet moment for a while." He moved to her, heart pounding. The gentle hum of the ship underscored the sudden intimacy. Slowly he reached for her waist, fingers trailing the edge of her uniform. She pressed closer, breath catching. Their first kiss in the hideout had been frantic and desperate. Now, the air hummed with a different energy, deeper and more assured. She tilted her head, meeting his lips with deliberate sensuality. A soft moan rumbled in her throat, and he responded with a quiet groan of his own, hands sliding up her sides. She guided him to the bed, the surface shifting slightly to accommodate them. The bioluminescent patterns on the walls pulsed in time with the quickening pace of her glow. Tavian's mind spun, lost in the taste of her lips, the warmth of her body. He carefully undid the fastenings of her uniform, mindful of her healing ribs. She sighed against his mouth, tail curling around his leg. Her skin was a tapestry of shifting light, each flicker revealing a new pattern as she arched under his touch. He found himself hovering over her, mesmerized by the luminescent lines that glowed brighter wherever he touched. She let out a shuddering breath, tangling her fingers in his hair as he ventured soft kisses down her throat. Her scales felt cool but alive, and he could sense her heartbeat accelerating. Every shift brought them closer, stoking a flame of urgent desire. She tugged his shirt aside, her gaze flicking over his bare skin with unabashed curiosity, as though she was eager to map every inch of him. He bent to kiss her shoulder, tasting the faint electric tang of her skin. She let out a breathy laugh, half delirious with sensation, her tail stroking the back of his thigh in an intimate caress that sent sparks through him. Bit by bit, clothes fell away, and the tension rose. In waves, building until they could barely speak, it was all touch and gasps. The wet press of their mouths, the slide of her scaled limbs against his. She guided him closer with quiet urgency, her eyes brimming with need. When they finally joined, the sensation stole his breath. She clung to him, arching in pleasure, the glow of her skin intensifying in mesmerizing patterns. He lost himself in the rhythm of their bodies, a raw, pulsing connection that felt both otherworldly and achingly real. She whispered his name in her language, some melodic version that made him shiver, and he responded with a low groan, burying his face against her neck. Time blurred into a series of heated moments, each one more consuming than the last. Afterward, they lay tangled in each other's arms, breathing unevenly. Saria's tail remained curled over his leg, a light anchor that hinted at an emotional bond. He watched her chest rise and fall, the bruise on her ribs nearly healed thanks to the advanced treatments. She caught him staring, a hint of a smile curving her lips. "What?" she murmured, voice raspy with spent passion. He traced a fingertip along her glowing collarbone. "Just never thought I'd be here like this," he huffed a laugh, "and certainly not with the powerful alien commander." She let out a soft chuckle, shifting to rest her head against his shoulder. "Nor did I think I'd bond with a human salvager. Life is strange." Her voice turned introspective, a quiet vulnerability. "I don't know what comes next. The war, my obligations. But I want you with me. I can't let go now." A swirl of emotion filled him. He gently cupped her chin, guiding her gaze to his. "I'm here as long as you want me," he said simply. She closed her eyes, exhaling in relief, and they shared a lingering kiss that spoke volumes about unspoken promises. Inevitably, duty called. A soft chime echoed in the room, summoning the commander to the bridge. Sarfreya groaned, disentangling herself. Tavian helped her dress, a surprisingly intimate act that involved refastening her uniform around her tail and the ridges of her body. She took a moment to smooth her hair like crests, the glow in her scales settling to a steady, contented hue. Tavian hastily pulled on his own clothes, cheeks warm from both the lingering desire and the knowledge that the entire ship likely suspected what they'd been doing. They emerged onto the bridge side by side, ignoring the curious glances. Sariara's second in man delivered a quick status update. The fleet was ready to deploy the decoy frigate and attempt to slip the blockade. The plan hinged on timing and precise maneuvering. Sariel listened intently, then nodded. "We proceed." Tavian hung back, letting her command, yet she occasionally glanced over her shoulder at him in unspoken reassurance. He approached the console. "Any chance you need a pilot for the decoy?" he asked quietly, heart pounding. Part of him felt compelled to volunteer. She considered. "It's dangerous," she said softly. They'll be chasing that frigate with everything they have. You could be killed. He met her gaze, lifting a shoulder. It's what I do, right? Take risks. He tried for a roguish grin, though he wasn't entirely without fear, but an odd sense of purpose burned within him. If this mission helped secure her fleet's future, he wanted to be part of it. She studied him for a long moment. Then she inclined her head. Very well, you will pilot the frigate with a small crew, lure the hunters away, then jump out at the last second. We'll slip through the blockade, reunite on the other side. She paused, lowering her voice. Don't die, Tavian. He gave a tight, reassuring nod. I'll do my best. She stepped closer, ignoring the eyes of her crew. Her tail brushed his calf and she murmured, when this is over, come back to me. He swallowed hard, brushing his fingers over hers briefly. Count on it. Then he turned on his heel, heart thrumming with a mix of excitement and dread, to prepare for the mission. The decoy frigate was an older model, battered from previous battles, its hull scarred. Perfect for the ruse. Tavian boarded with a lean crew of volunteers. They were all from Saria's species, except for him. They regarded him with a mixture of caution and reluctant trust. He followed the instructions, running pre-flight checks. The plan was simple: approach the blockade, appear to be carrying something valuable, and draw the hunters' main force away. Once they gave chase, the rest of Saharia's fleet would slip through to a strategic system behind them. Tavian settled into the pilot seat, scanning the readouts. The aliens manned weapon stations and engineering. He recognized a few from the commander's bridge. Nerves fluttered in his stomach as the frigate undocked, joining the formation. Across the void, Saria's main fleet hovered, ready to jump on his signal. They would let him get just close enough to be not ice before enacting the decoy plan. He drew a steadying breath, remembering her face, the feel of her body against his. He forced himself to focus. The stakes were high. If he botched this, Saria's entire plan could collapse and her people would suffer. He guided the frigate forward, accelerating toward the blockade coordinates. The console beeped as they neared the edge of the sensor range. Sure enough, multiple enemy vessels loomed ahead, forming a tight net of cruisers and smaller interceptors. Tavion's mouth went dry. All right, he said, voice echoing through the comm. Weapons up, but don't fire. We want them to see us and chase, not engage right away. The crew acknowledged, preparing the ruse. The frigate broadcast a false signal, making it look like a prime target carrying essential cargo. Tavian eased into their scanning radius. A beep indicated the blockade had spotted them. The hunters' ships broke formation, rotating to face the intruder. A harsh voice crackled over the comm in an alien tongue, presumably demanding surrender. Tavian cut the transmission, refusing to respond. Instead, he powered the engines to push deeper into their territory, as if trying to run a blockade. The hunters reacted predictably, surging forward to intercept. That's it, Tavian muttered. Take the bait. Several interceptors peeled away from the blockade, moving to flank him. The main cruiser turned to give chase, leaving a gap in the blockade line. On the distant scanner, Tavian saw the rest of Saria's fleet slip forward, hugging the perimeter. The plan was working. His adrenaline spiked. He angled the frigate away, leading the pursuers on a cat-and-mouse chase. The hunters fired warning shots, lancing the void with bright beams. The frigate shuddered under a glancing blow. The crew tensed, but Tavian barked, "Steady! Wait for my mark!" The blockade ships followed, lured by the false intel about valuable cargo. Meanwhile, Saria's main force glided into the system behind them, undetected. Tavian grinned in triumph, until the main cruiser accelerated faster than expected, closing the distance. "They're on our tail," one of the alien crew shouted, panic evident. Tavian's heart hammered. They needed to hold attention a bit longer to be sure Saria's people were clear. He spun the frigate in a bold maneuver, weaving between smaller hunks of debris. Laser fire crackled dangerously close, lighting up the cockpit. The controls jerked under his hands. "Just a little more," he muttered. A beep on the console indicated Saria's fleet was nearly in position. Then, an impact slammed them from behind. Sparks flew, the frigate's hull screeching. Warnings blared. Tavian cursed. The enemy cruiser had tagged them with a partial tractor beam. "Breaking free now," he shouted, pushing the engines to redline. The frigate's hull groaned. For a second, he feared they'd be ripped apart. Then the engines surged, overcame the beam's lock, and they snapped free. Alarms whooped, systems flickering. He scanned the readouts. The main blockade was in disarray, half chasing him, half trying to reorganize as they realized the rest of Saraya's fleet was slipping by. "We did it," he breathed. "They're through." Relief soared through him, but they still had to escape themselves. The tractor beam had damaged the engines, and the enemy cruiser loomed. "We have a jump coordinate ready," the cruise navigator shouted. "But the spool is unstable." "Do it anyway," Tavian barked. "Better risk an unstable jump than certain death." The navigator complied, entering the coordinates. The frigate shuddered, a nasty grinding sound emanating from the rear. The enemy cruiser lined up a shot. Tavian clenched his teeth, forcing the damaged engines to hold steady. The slipstream drive powered up, glowing red on the readout. Come on," he urged, glancing at the forward view. The cruiser's weapon ports glowed with lethal potential. At the last moment, the slipstream drive engaged. The frigate lurched forward, the stars smearing into lines of light. Tavian whooped in relief, though the jump was rough. They hurtled through twisted space, the engine's complaints echoing across the cockpit. Then the swirl of starlight spat them out in a different sector. The frigate spun, out of control. Tavian wrestled the controls, bracing for a crash. The ship jolted as he managed to stabilize them, but the damage was done. The engines died with a pitiful whine, leaving them adrift in a quiet patch of stars. "We're alive," one of the crew said in astonishment. Tavian exhaled, muscles trembling. They'd succeeded in their mission, but now they were stranded. "We'll signal the fleet," Tavian muttered, forcing calm. "They should be free of the blockade. They can come pick us up." He fired a distress beacon on the encoded channel. Then, drained of adrenaline, he slumped back in the pilot's seat. The crew exchanged tentative smiles of victory. Minute. Satik by turning into an hour. Tavian tried not to worry. Saria's fleet had to secure the route, possibly engage in some skirmishes they'd come. He fiddled with the comms, scanning for any sign of them. Finally, a ping. He saw a friendly signature appear on the sensors. A small alien corvette dropped out of jump, gliding toward them. Tavian and the crew erupted in cheers. They were tractored aboard the corvette, which promptly whisked them back to the main fleet rendezvous. When Tavian disembarked, he was greeted with applause from some of Saria's people. They were battered but triumphant, having circumvented the blockade. He searched the crowd for Saria, pulse pounding. Then, he spotted her striding through the throng, tail swishing with purpose. Before he could speak, she threw her arms around him in a fierce embrace, burying her face against his shoulder. He staggered slightly but held her tight, inhaling her warm, electric scent. A wave of relief and joy washed over him. She pulled back, eyes brimming with emotion, ignoring the onlookers. "You made it," she breathed. "Never doubted it for a second," he teased, though his voice cracked with relief. She laughed, the sound bright against the hum of the docking bay. Then her expression turned more serious, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, lips curving in gratitude. Her tail curled around his leg, a gesture that felt possessive, and he was all too happy to be possessed. The second-in-command cleared his throat politely. "Commander, we've regrouped with the fleet. Casualties are minimal, supplies are secured. We're ready for your orders." Saraya nodded, turning away but keeping one hand clasped in Tavian's. "Let's move to a safer system, away from the hunters, begin repairs and reevaluate our next steps." The officer bowed and hurried off, leaving them momentarily alone amidst the bustle. Tavian saw the respect in the crew's eyes. Saraya's plan had succeeded, and his role in the decoy mission earned him a measure of their trust. When the chaos subsided, she led him through the corridors to a wide observation deck at the ship's bow. A transparent window offered a view of the stars, the backdrop of swirling nebulae. She exhaled, shoulders finally loosening. "We'll head to one of our hidden strongholds," she explained quietly. "The war isn't over, but we've bought time. My people are safe for now." Tavian gazed at her, heart full. "I'm glad. And I'm proud to be part of it." She turned to him, eyes gleaming. "I meant what I said. You are no mere passenger. You have a place with us." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the depth of her feelings. He slid his hands around her waist, drawing her close. "I want that place," he said. But more than anything, I want to stand beside you wherever you go." She smiled, tears gathering at the edges of her luminous eyes. He gently brushed a thumb across her cheek, catching a stray droplet. The glow of her scales flared, pulsing with the same emotion that thrummed in his veins. "Yes," she whispered, leaning in to press her forehead against his. The gesture carried a deep sense of trust and intimacy, reminding him of the first time she'd done it on her wrecked ship. Only now, there was no desperation. There was promise. He cradled her face, meeting her gaze with quiet awe. Beyond the glass, stars drifted by, a silent witness to their moment of transformation. In a matter of days, they'd gone from strangers and a doomed wreck to something deeply bound, a human salvager turned pilot, and an alien commander leading her people through danger. The future loomed, filled with battles, responsibilities, and uncertain outcomes. But right now, in her gentle embrace, Tavian felt an unshakable certainty that they'd face it together. She closed her eyes, resting against him. He held her, lips brushing the top of her head, tail lightly wrapped around his ankle. In that quiet moment, with the hum of the starship and the faint crackle of cosmic radiation in the background, they shared an unspoken vow. Whatever came next, whatever conflict or challenge, would be met side by side. And in that union, they found something that transcended species and circumstance, a love forged in chaos, tempered by shared danger, and sealed by the warmth of intimately joined hearts. They stood there, on the threshold of a new future, ready to face it together.